Are you absolutely certain you know what history looks like? That museums preserve the truth? That everything you were taught in school is fact and not someone's very convenient version of events? Because today I am going to destroy something you have believed your entire life, and I will not do it with words or theories. I will do it with specific names, specific dates, and scientific evidence that official history has been carefully hiding for several centuries. We are talking about ancient coins. The very ones standing behind glass in the British Museum, the Louvre, the Hermitage. The ones selling at auction for hundreds of thousands of dollars. The ones that scholars call irrefutable proof of the existence of the great civilisations of antiquity. Here is the thing. They do not exist. Not a single genuine one. They never existed, and I have the proof. Today you will learn the name of the man who in the 16th century set up industrial production of ancient coins right in Rome and sold them to the papal court. You will learn how in the 19th century one German craftsman fooled every numismatist in Europe using a two-wheeled carriage, metal shavings, and a little grease. You will learn that in Russia, fake ancient hoards were buried by the sackful, and some of them are still in the ground right now. And finally, you will hear about the scientific examination of 2010 conducted by scholars from 4 countries that put a final, definitive cross over all of official numismatics. That examination was never refuted. It was simply buried in silence. Because it cannot be refuted. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is not fantasy. This is documents, names, and the physics of the atomic composition of metal, which does not know how to lie. Watch until the end. Every minute of this video changes the way you look at history. And after the final minute, you will never be able to look at a museum display case the way you looked at it before. Let us begin. Here is a simple question, an obvious one, the kind nobody seems to ask out loud. If ancient Greece existed for thousands of years, where were its coins all that time? If the Roman Empire was minting gold for centuries, why did not a single medieval chronicler, merchant or bishop ever mention holding a Roman coin in his hands? Where are the records of discoveries? Where are the descriptions? Where is even one credible document from before the 16th century that says, "Here, I found a coin from ancient Rome"? Those documents do not exist. Not one, not anywhere. Before the 16th century, ancient coins did not exist in the information space at all. They were not described, not collected, not mentioned in wills, not recorded in trade registries. Not in a single medieval catalogue, not in any monastic treasury inventory, not in any royal archive is there a single word about coins of Caesar, Alexander, or the Persian kings. This is not a random gap in the historical record. This is a gaping hole that everybody has agreed to ignore. This applies directly to the thousands of items in the British Museum, the Louvre, the Hermitage, and dozens of other major collections around the world. Every single one of them materialized from nowhere across just 2 or 3 centuries. And then, suddenly, the 16th century arrives. Within just a few decades, the European antique market is flooded with coins. Gold ones, silver ones, bronze ones, bearing the profiles of kings, emperors, and gods, inscribed in Greek, Latin, and Aramaic. Coins of Alexander the Great, coins of Julius Caesar, coins of Bosporan kings and Persian rulers, coins of Carthage, a civilization that, according to the official version, was obliterated by Rome before the Common Era. They appeared on ruins, in gardens, in private estates, and immediately passed into the collections of the wealthiest people in Europe. Notice the pattern. Not gradually, the way genuine archaeological finds tend to surface. Not as rare individual pieces, pulled from the earth once a decade, but in a flood, in bulk, as though someone had opened a warehouse and started selling wholesale. By the middle of the 17th century, Antique shops in Rome, Florence, Venice, and Amsterdam were buried under ancient coins. The first scholarly catalogues appeared, with descriptions and engravings. Experts emerged, men who, for a substantial fee, issued certificates of authenticity. A market appeared. Prices appeared. Fortunes were built on the trade in antiquities. This applies to the very mechanism by which scientific knowledge about antiquity was constructed. It was built not on excavations, not on archives, but on the antique market, where money and a dealer's reputation were the only standards of proof. By the mid-19th century, the picture had become positively staggering. The world's greatest museums, the British Museum, the Louvre, the Berlin Pergamon, the Vienna Kunsthistorisches, displayed thousands of ancient coins, Greek tetradrachms, Roman denarii, Persian darics, Byzantine solidi, coins of kings for whom no other material evidence exists anywhere on earth except these same coins. Think about that carefully. The sole proof of the existence of entire states and rulers is a collection of coins of unknown origin and unknown manufacture. Official scholarship answers this question simply. The coins are genuine because they are in museums. And they are in museums because they are genuine. This is called circular reasoning. In serious science, this approach goes by a different name entirely: the substitution of evidence for proof. So why do I insist that genuine ancient coins do not exist? Not because I enjoy arguing with textbooks, not because I am opposed to science or drawn to conspiracy theories, but because there is a specific, verifiable mechanism that explains where these coins came from, and that mechanism has nothing to do with ancient civilizations. Let us start with the simplest possible question, the one any rational person is obliged to ask a specialist. Can you date this coin precisely? Not approximately, not supposedly 2nd century before the Common Era. Precisely, with evidence, with identification of the mine from which the silver was extracted, with documented confirmation of the discovery. And here is where things become truly revealing. Numismatists cannot accurately date the overwhelming majority of so-called ancient coins. Not because the technology is lacking. Today's technology can establish the age and origin of a metal to within a decade. But because the results of such analyses are categorically unwelcome to museums, collectors, and the antique market alike. And so an unwritten law of numismatics takes over, one that every professional knows and nobody states aloud. This applies to hundreds of thousands of coins in state and private collections around the world. If a coin cannot be dated or identified, it automatically becomes ancient. Precisely that. Not an item of undetermined origin, not a coin of unknown period. Immediately, antiquity. Ancient Greece, Rome, Persia, the Bosporan Kingdom. The more mysterious the coin, the older it is declared to be. The harder its origin is to establish, the more confidently the expert pronounces it 1,000 years old. This is not science. This is a business wearing science as a disguise. Consider what this means in practice. Any metal object that cannot be precisely dated receives the label of ancient. Along with that label comes a price, a reputation, and a place in a museum display case. The system is constructed so that questioning authenticity automatically turns the questioner into an enemy of science, an amateur, a crank, a marginal voice. Museums do not merely preserve coins, they preserve the system under which any serious examination is inherently dangerous. This applies to the very structure of numismatic expertise. It is built not on falsifiable criteria, but on the authority of the expert, a person whose income depends directly on the coins remaining authentic. And here I want you to grasp one fundamental point. This is not about isolated forgeries that surface in museums from time to time. That happens, and the newspapers write about it. This is about a system, an entire industry that manufactured antiquity across several centuries with specific craftsmen, specific technologies, and specific buyers. And I am about to give you the first name on that list. But before naming the forgers, it is necessary to address a more fundamental question. Where did the enormous mass of coins come from that began to be passed off as ancient from the 16th century onward? Some of them are pure fabrications produced in workshops, but another portion consists of perfectly real coins that genuinely existed and genuinely circulated from hand to hand, just not in antiquity, in the 16th and 17th centuries. And there is an explanation for this from a first-hand witness, a man who saw everything with his own eyes. In 1637, the German scholar and traveller Adam Olearius travelled to Persia as part of a diplomatic mission on behalf of the Duke of Holstein. Olearius was meticulous, methodical, and observant, exactly the kind of man one can trust. He recorded everything: customs, trade, the layout of cities, the circulation of money. And here is what he wrote about Persian coins, verbatim, without omission. In general, regarding copper coins among the Persians, the practice is such that every large city has its own coin, which circulates nowhere except where it was struck, and for no longer than 1 year, so that the markings on these coins change annually. This applies to coins currently held in museums under labels reading Ancient Persia, approximately 4th to 2nd century before the Common Era. Those are precisely the undated city coins described by Olearius. Read that passage carefully. Every major city in 17th century Persia struck its own coin. That coin was not accepted outside the city. Its period of circulation was 1 year, after which the markings changed and the previous coins went out of use. And, most critically, these coins bore no date, no year, no reference to a ruler who could be unambiguously identified. Only images, rulers, animals, ornaments, different every year, different in every city. Now consider, across 2 centuries, from the 15th to the 17th, in Persia alone, hundreds of thousands of such coins accumulated. Every year, in every city, a new batch. The coins settled into the earth, into hiding places, into old chests. They bore no date. They had no connection to any specific ruler who could be verified against chronicles. They were real, old, worn, and completely impossible to identify. This applies equally to coins from other Asian states of the same period: the Ottoman Empire, the states of Central Asia, the Caucasus. The system of local undated coins with a short circulation period was widespread across the entire region. And then these coins fall into the hands of European antiquaries. What does an antiquary do when he sees an old coin with unfamiliar markings, no date, and no clear attribution? He does the one thing that allows him to sell it for the maximum price. He declares it ancient, because ancient carries weight. Ancient is worth money. Ancient attracts buyers. And proving the contrary, that the coin is not ancient, but simply a Persian municipal issue from 1620, is virtually impossible. There is no date. There are no documents. There are no chronicles. There is only metal and an image. This is how the machine for manufacturing antiquity operated. Not only in Persia, across all of Asia, across the entire Black Sea region, across all of North Africa, wherever there existed a tradition of local undated coins with short circulation periods, European antiquaries found an inexhaustible source of ancient artifacts. The coins were genuine, old. The metal was authentic. The only forgery was the date, or rather its complete absence, which in the hands of interested parties became evidence of the most profound antiquity. This applies to the very principle by which museum collections of ancient coins were assembled in the 18th and 19th centuries. The foundation was not excavation finds, but merchandise from the antique market, where sellers themselves determined the age and provenance of each item. Adam Olearius wrote about this openly and without any ulterior motive. He was simply recording what he saw. He had no idea that his observations would, centuries later, become one of the key pieces of evidence for a colossal historical deception. And the specialists who read Olearius, and they did read him, it is part of the standard historical curriculum, chose to behave as though that passage did not exist. Because if it is taken seriously, a substantial portion of the foundation on which all ancient numismatics rests begins to collapse. Undated Persian coins are only the first layer of the deception. Convenient, practical, requiring no particular effort. Take an old coin without a date, call it ancient, sell it at 3 times the price. But the foundation of the entire system of so-called ancient coins is not made up of repurposed municipal issues from Persia or the Ottoman Empire. The foundation is built on clean, deliberate, professionally executed forgeries. And this industry has a founding father, a specific man, with a name, a biography, and a record that leaves no doubt about what he was doing. His name was Piero Ligorio, Italian, born around 1513 in Naples. By profession, painter, engraver, architect. By vocation, as it later emerged, forger. One of the most talented and productive forgers in the history of European culture. A man who single-handedly, or rather with a small team of assistants, created an entire era. Not metaphorically, literally. He invented artifacts that became proof of the existence of civilisations, and those artifacts still stand behind glass in the world's greatest museums. In 16th century Rome, Ligorio enjoyed an impeccable reputation. He was known as a learned antiquary, a man of encyclopedic knowledge, a specialist in ancient artifacts. He worked for the papal court, participated in Vatican architectural projects, and moved among cardinals and patrons. This was the ideal position for a man planning a grand scheme. A scholar's reputation opened every door. Connections with the church provided protection, and knowledge of authentic ancient art, the kind preserved in texts and the few surviving architectural monuments, provided the technical foundation for convincing forgeries. This applies to the fundamental principle of successful falsification. To convincingly counterfeit antiquity, one must be a genuine expert. An amateur produces a coin that the first numismatist will discredit. Ligorio was no amateur. He was a professional of the highest order. In his Roman house, he equipped what his contemporaries delicately called a workshop, but which was, in substance, a small metallurgical operation. Gold, silver, and bronze were smelted there. Dies, the matrices used for striking coins, were carved there by hand. Ligorio carved those dies himself with his own hands, by the hundreds. He engraved on them the profiles of rulers who had never existed, or of real rulers whose coins nobody had ever seen. Greek kings, Roman emperors, rulers of Lydia, an ancient state in Asia Minor, about whose coinage there existed not a single credible piece of evidence. The Bosporan kingdom, perfect because it was far away and impossible to verify. Each die was a separate work of the engraver's art. Each coin was a convincing artifact capable of deceiving a connoisseur. He struck them not in units or dozens, in sackfuls, in batches, hundreds of pieces from a single die. Gold, silver, bronze, everything went into production. Different metals, different sizes, different degrees of detail. Some coins looked ceremonial, royal. Others looked ordinary, commercial, worn from long use. Ligorio understood perfectly. A collector wants variety. Uniform merchandise raises suspicion. A living, genuine numismatic collection is always a mixture of rarities and commonplace pieces, masterworks and run-of-the-mill coins. This applies to the psychology of the antique market of that period. A buyer trusted not an individual coin, but a collection as a whole. The more varied and numerous the find, the more convincing its provenance appeared. The finished coins needed to be legitimized. And here, Ligorio displayed no less talent than in his engraving. He transported his products to the ruins of ancient Roman villas outside the city. There, in carefully chosen locations, beneath fallen columns, in the cracks of old walls, at the bases of foundations, he buried coins. Sometimes individually, sometimes in small hoards of several dozen pieces. And then, after a suitable interval, he would, as if by chance, discover them, in the presence of witnesses naturally. Sometimes those witnesses were his clients, wealthy collectors whom he had quietly tipped off that a particular site was worth excavating. A joint discovery immediately removed all questions about the coin's origins. Declared authentic, the coins left the market immediately. Collectors queued for them. Prices were extraordinary, for these were genuine artifacts of vanished civilizations, a direct touch of history. Ligorio charged whatever he wished. His reputation as a scholar antiquary was his primary capital, and he deployed it with skill. Within a few years, he transformed himself from a modestly resourceful artist into a wealthy and influential man. He was received in the finest houses of Rome. His opinion on the authenticity of coins was considered definitive. The great expert on antiquity, and simultaneously its chief manufacturer. Ligorio's scheme could have continued indefinitely. Everything was going splendidly. Reputation impeccable. Clients satisfied. Coins selling. Money flowing. But every forger has a weak point. Ligorio's turned out to be where he least expected it, in his own vanity. In 1553, he published the Book of the Antiquities of Rome, a substantial scholarly work, with descriptions of ruins, architectural sketches, and historical commentary, and, naturally, with a detailed account of coin hoards discovered on the territory of the Eternal City. The book argued that Rome was an ancient city of the most profound antiquity, and the proof was the enormous hoards of Roman imperial coins found directly in Roman soil. The book was meant to be the crowning argument, the final word, irrefutable proof. Instead, a scandal erupted, because the scholarly community of the time had a good memory, and in that memory lived another document, written 100 years before Ligorio, far more rigorous and far more inconvenient. The treatise of Leon Battista Alberti, Description of the Roman Cities. Alberti was not an antiquary and not a dealer in ancient artifacts. He was an architect and mathematician, a man who measured rather than imagined. On the commission of Pope Nicholas V himself, he personally surveyed Rome, with instruments, with measurements, with drawings, and he recorded what he found. This applies to a treatise that still sits in the archives today, and that no official historian enjoys quoting in full. Here is what Alberti wrote, verbatim. With all possible care, using mathematical instruments of my own invention, I studied, as they are now known to us, the directions and outlines of the city walls of Rome. In the end, no traces of ancient walls can be discovered anywhere. Anywhere. Not a trace. Not a single fragment. A professional architect, equipped with specially designed measuring instruments, surveyed the whole of Rome and found no trace whatsoever of ancient city walls. Now ask yourself one simple question. Can a great ancient city exist without city walls? Anyone with even a passing familiarity with the history of fortification will answer immediately. No, it cannot. City walls are not decoration and not a luxury. They are the condition of a city's existence as such. Without walls, there is no defense. Without defense, there is no city. This was understood by every ruler from China to Britain, from the Sumerian city-states to the medieval European communes. In 15th century Rome, there were no ancient walls. No ancient Rome ever existed. This is not a provocative headline. It is the conclusion that follows directly from Alberti's measurements. Rome as a city began to be built only in the 15th century, on empty or near-empty ground. The walls, ruins, and foundations that tourists are shown today as ancient came into existence no earlier than the 15th century, and what was not yet finished, or what suffered in the catastrophes of the 16th century, the fires, the wars, the epidemics that devastated the Apennine Peninsula, became the ruins of ancient Rome that today appear on lists of World Heritage Sites. This applies to what Ligorio described in his book as ancient walls, antique inscriptions on facades, and ruins of Roman villas. All of it, according to the documentary evidence of Italian sources from that very period, did not exist before the end of the 15th century. That is precisely the contradiction that Ligorio's critics seized upon. If Alberti, 100 years earlier, found no traces of ancient walls, where did they come from in Ligorio's descriptions? If the ruins described in such detail in the Book of the Antiquities do not appear in any source before the end of the 15th century, who built them? And most importantly, if coins were allegedly found in those ruins, then in the ruins of what exactly were they found? The questions were devastating, and Ligorio had no answers to them. Ligorio was trapped in a snare of his own making. The questions hung in the air, and silence was no longer possible. Rome's scholarly community demanded answers. Several influential cardinals, to whom he had sold coins over the years, now looked at him in an entirely different light. The prosecution office of the Papal States began examining the circumstances of his discoveries. The situation smelled of prison. Real prison, stone walls, with no prospect of a quick exit. Ligorio did what every cornered fraudster does. He began to confess, in measured doses, carefully, precisely enough to avoid criminal prosecution, and not enough to destroy himself entirely. He declared that his book of the Antiquities of Rome was not genuine history, but reconstruction, an attempt to portray what Rome might have looked like had it truly been an ancient city. A scholar's fantasy dressed in the form of a scientific treatise. Artistic license, nothing more. This applies to the classic strategy of the exposed forger. Do not deny the facts, redefine them. Not, I lied, but I was misunderstood. With the coins, more had to be conceded. Under pressure from specific evidence, witnesses who had seen him burying hoards, craftsmen who had worked in his metallurgical workshop, he confirmed that the coins had been made by his own hand, that they were not artifacts of ancient Rome, that the entire system of discoveries at excavation sites had been staged from beginning to end. Some clients received their money back. Ligorio offered public apologies. The scandal, it seemed, should have destroyed him permanently. But it did not, because there was a third player in this story, powerful, interested, and absolutely unwilling to allow the full truth to emerge. That player was the Church. Consider the logic carefully. What did Ligorio's coins prove? They proved the existence of ancient Rome, the existence of Roman emperors, the existence of the Roman Empire as a state with a 1,000-year history. And what did that mean for the Church? Only one thing: apostolic succession. Rome as the center of Christianity derived its legitimacy precisely from its antiquity. A church founded in ancient Rome, inheriting the authority of the ancient emperors, had the right to universal spiritual and political power over the entire Christian world. Remove the antiquity of Rome, and the entire edifice of papal authority collapses. All the theology, all the political doctrine, all the authority of the Vatican was built on Rome being ancient, on its having existed for thousands of years, on the Apostle Peter having preached there, on the papal throne having roots in time immemorial. Ligorio's coins reinforced that edifice, and the Church understood this perfectly. This applies to the mechanism of institutional defense of a lie. When a lie benefits a sufficiently large and sufficiently powerful institution, that institution becomes its guarantor. not because the people within it are malicious, but because the truth in that case is incompatible with the institution's own existence. Ligorio did not go to prison. The case was quietly closed. Moreover, after a brief period of disgrace, he returned to work. He continued with architectural projects. He continued to advise collectors. He passed away in 1583 in Ferrara in the service of Duke Alfonso II d'Este, surrounded by manuscripts and archival materials that he had himself largely fabricated. His extensive archive, thousands of pages of notes on antiquities, is still partially held in the National Library of Turin, and it is still used by researchers, with caveats naturally, with caution, but used. And what became of his coins? They went nowhere. The pieces he did not buy back from clients settled into collections. Collections passed down through inheritance, then entered museums. Museums assigned them inventory numbers, produced scholarly descriptions, included them in catalogues. And today, the coins of Piero Ligorio, a man who personally confessed to making them, are displayed in museum halls as genuine artifacts of ancient civilizations. Behind glass, with labels, with the century and the state indicated. Why do museums not remove them from display? The answer is simple and unpleasant, because removing Ligorio's coins would require explaining how they got there. That explanation would pull questions about other coins, questions about other collections, questions about methods of attribution and dating. The entire numismatic market, whose turnover today runs to billions, depends on the authenticity of ancient coins not being subjected to systematic scrutiny. Once that dam is breached, the financial losses would be catastrophic. For museums, for auction houses, for private collectors, for insurance companies, for an entire ecosystem that has grown up around the trade in antiquities. Otherwise, their reputations and their very profitable business finished. You think the story of Ligorio is an exception, a single case of a brilliant fraudster who was eventually exposed and punished? Then meet Carl Wilhelm Becker, the man who took what Ligorio had started and put it on an industrial footing, who worked not in the 16th century, when methods of verification barely existed, but in the 19th, an era when numismatics was already considered a serious academic discipline, and who was never exposed during his lifetime, because his forgeries were so perfect that professional experts accepted them as genuine without the slightest hesitation. Becker was born in 1772 in the small German town of Offenbach am Main. His family was not wealthy, his education was modest, but his hands were extraordinary. Precision, patience, the ability to work with the smallest details, all of this came naturally to him. In his youth, he traded wine and tried various crafts, until in the early 19th century he found himself at the Munich Mint. This is where his real education began. Not at university, not over books, but in the workshop, where, with his own hands, he learned the technology of making coin dies, mastered metal alloys, understood how metal behaves under the pressure of a strike, how genuine wear looks on a coin that has passed through thousands of hands. This applies to a principle that holds in any era. The best forger is always a man who has passed through genuine professional training in the very field he intends to falsify. Through his conversations with Munich collectors, Becker quickly grasped the essential point. The most profitable commodity on the antique market was ancient coins. Not paintings, not furniture, not porcelain. Coins specifically. Because coins are compact, easily transported, easily concealed, and extremely difficult to verify. Because the ancient coin market in the early 19th century was already vast, overheated, and virtually unregulated. And because the buyer of an ancient coin is not simply a man with money, he is a man with ambitions, with a desire to touch history, with a willingness to pay 3 times the price for an object that cannot be checked but that he very much wants to believe is genuine. Becker began cautiously. His first works were copies of already known coins, not invented ones, but precise copies. He took coins from authoritative catalogues and reproduced them with jeweler's accuracy. At the same time, he deliberately introduced minor production defects, a double strike, where the image shifts slightly and doubles, poor centering, where the design is offset from the edge of the coin, weak striking, areas where the metal had not fully filled the die and the image appears blurred. All of these are genuine defects of genuine coin production. They appear constantly on authentic coins. And it was precisely these defects that convinced the experts. Nobody fakes these, they only appear on real coins. Having mastered the copies, Becker moved on to invention. He began creating coins of non-existent types, imaginary issues of real rulers, coins bearing portraits found in no catalogue, legend variants that could theoretically have existed but had never been documented. Over his years of work, he produced more than 600 dies. 600. Each carved by hand, with a burin on hardened steel, each a separate work of the engraver's art. Coins of ancient Greece, Rome, Carthage, Sicily, Asia Minor, the Black Sea region. He covered the entire ancient world, leaving no blank spaces. This applies to the scale of the operation. 600 dies mean thousands of coins that spread through collections across all of Europe and formed the foundation of museum holdings, considered authoritative benchmarks to this day. But the true masterpiece of Becker's engineering mind was his aging technology. A new coin is a disaster. It gleams, it is fresh. Its edges are sharp and its metal untouched. Any experienced numismatist will set it aside immediately. A coin must look old, genuinely old, with patina, with wear, with edges rounded by long circulation, with the particular scratches and dents left only by time and actual use. Chemical aging Becker rejected. It produced uneven results and under careful examination was visible to an experienced eye. He devised something better. On the springs of his two-wheeled carriage, he fixed an open metal box. Into the box he poured metal shavings soaked liberally in grease. The freshly struck coins went in alongside them, and the carriage set off, over cobblestone streets, over country roads, over city thoroughfares. The springs flexed, the box shook, the coins rolled through the shavings, struck against one another and against the walls, ground against the metal filings. After a few hours of such travelling, the coins looked as though centuries had passed over them. Edges, rounded. Surface, evenly worn. The greasy shavings packed into the recesses of the relief, imitating centuries of accumulated grime and patina. The result was flawless. His contemporaries nicknamed him the Baker of Antiquity. The name was apt. He truly baked coins, as a baker bakes bread. Regularly, methodically, in industrial quantities. And he sold his product across all of Europe. In London, in Paris, in Vienna, in St. Petersburg. Dealers took his merchandise eagerly. Becker's coins were technically perfect, and even the most authoritative experts of the time could not distinguish them from genuine articles. So convincingly did they appear. Producing coins is only half the work. The true art of the forger lies in giving the merchandise an impeccable legend of origin. A coin purchased from a dealer raises questions. A coin found in the ground raises none whatsoever. A discovery is an alibi. A discovery is a story. A discovery transforms a piece of metal into an artifact, and from that moment it is no longer the buyer who must prove authenticity. It is the skeptic who must prove forgery. Becker understood this perfectly. He developed what today would be called a distribution logistics system, except that instead of warehouses and couriers, there was a road carriage, a spade, and a carefully chosen location. Becker personally traveled through a substantial portion of Europe. He visited Italy, France, Austria, the German states, and the Netherlands. Everywhere the soil was suitable, in the most literal sense. Old ruins, abandoned estates, riverbanks known in official historiography as sites of ancient settlements, roads that the historical record designated as Roman. It was precisely in such places, the most unexpected yet accessible ones, that he buried his coins, sometimes individually, more often in small hoards of 20, 30, 50 coins together, arranged so that a passing peasant with a plough or a casual walker with a spade might stumble across them in a perfectly natural manner. This applies to the psychology of discovery itself. A person who finds a coin in the ground with his own hands will never doubt its authenticity. He has become a witness. He has become a participant in history. His personal experience of the find matters more than any expert opinion. The mechanism worked flawlessly. Hoards were discovered. Discoveries reached the newspapers. Newspapers reported yet another confirmation of the antiquity of a particular locality. Local authorities swelled with pride. Collectors queued for coins from the newly authenticated hoard, and it occurred to none of them that several months or years earlier, the same man had driven along that very road in his carriage with a rattling box bouncing on the springs. But what happened in Russia deserves a conversation of its own, because the Russian history of false ancient coins is not the story of a single fraudster with a spade. It is a state program, or at the very least, something that resembles a state program with alarming precision. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the Russian Empire was actively engaged in constructing its own historical identity. The annexation of Crimea, the Black Sea region, and the Caucasus required historical justification. It was necessary to demonstrate that these lands were not simply conquered territories, but originally civilized spaces with deep historical roots connected to the great cultures of the past. The Greek colonies of the Black Sea, the Bosporan kings, the Scythian chieftains, all of this fitted the required concept, and coins were the primary material evidence. This applies to a practice that today would be called historical policy. The state financed discoveries that confirmed the required version of the past. In St. Petersburg, Odessa, Kerch, and Chersonesus, ancient coins were struck in sackfuls. Not a metaphor, literally in sacks, in batches, in industrial volumes, after which they were transported to the site and buried. With full procedural compliance, the correct soil layer, the correct combination with other objects, sometimes fragments of ceramics or bones placed nearby for authenticity. Then ceremonial excavations were organized, with invited scholars, with representatives of authority, with detailed official records. The finds were described, catalogued, dispatched to museums, and declared irrefutable proof of the presence of ancient civilizations on the lands of the Russian Empire. Some of these hoards were discovered and entered into academic circulation precisely in this way, through solemn official excavations that on closer examination proved to be carefully staged performances. Others were not dug up in time. For various reasons, circumstances changed, personnel changed, the political situation shifted, and those hoards remained in the ground, somewhere in Crimea, somewhere along the banks of the Dnieper or the Don, somewhere in the foothills of the Caucasus. They lie there still, and they wait. They wait for the next fortunate soul with a metal detector who will dig up a coin, tremble with excitement, photograph the find, post it online and write, "Look, here it is, living proof of antiquity on our land." And thousands of people will believe him, because the coin is real, the metal is real, the earth is real. Only the date is invented 200 years ago by people who knew exactly what they were doing and did it deliberately. Ligorio. Becker. Russia in the 18th and 19th centuries. Those are the three stories I have told. Three documented, verifiable, historically confirmed cases of large-scale falsification of ancient coins. But if you think that is a comprehensive list, you are profoundly mistaken. These are only the cases we know about, only the ones that surfaced, partially, incompletely, with qualifications and suppression. Behind each of them stand dozens of other names, other workshops, other schemes that were never exposed at all. Because the system that manufactured antiquity was smarter than any individual whistleblower. There were Florentine workshops of the 15th century supplying ancient Greek coins to order for papal nuncios. There were Venetian merchants of the 16th century who had set up the import of Eastern coins for subsequent reattribution. There were French antiquaries of the 17th century working on direct commissions from the royal court, which required historical justification for its claims to a Gallo-Roman inheritance. There were English collectors of the 18th century who financed expeditions to Greece and Asia Minor with a predetermined outcome. To name all of these people would be to write a multi-volume work. This is not the format of the present conversation, and it is not necessary. Because I have something else. Something that makes all these stories about Ligorio and Becker look like an entertaining preface. This applies to the fundamental distinction between a historical anecdote and a scientific proof. An anecdote can be disputed, explained, questioned. A scientific proof cannot. Everything discussed so far is history. Documents, testimonies, confessions. All of it can be interpreted in different ways. Supporters of the official version will say, Ligorio was an exception, Becker was an anomaly. The Russian forgeries were a local phenomenon. Everything else is genuine, verified, authentic. Arguing with historical arguments can go on indefinitely. It is done easily and with pleasure. One simply cites a different source, a different interpretation, a different school of thought. But there are things with which argument is impossible. Physics, chemistry, isotope analysis, spectroscopy. Methods that work with the atomic structure of metal and produce results that depend on no one's interpretation. Metal does not lie. Metal does not remember who extracted it or when. Metal simply holds within itself the isotopic composition of the ore deposit from which it was drawn. And that composition is a unique identifier that cannot be forged, cannot be rewritten, and cannot be disputed in the court of history. This is precisely the weapon I have saved for the finale. Not a testimony, not a document, not a historical reconstruction, but a scientific examination. Large-scale, international, conducted by a group of scholars from several countries with an impeccable academic reputation. An examination that was published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal, that passed all the procedures of scientific verification, and that arrived at a conclusion so devastating to official history that its results were immediately buried. Not by any government decree, but by something far more effective: the silence of interested parties. This is the heavy artillery. This is the cherry on top that I have deliberately held back until last. Because after it, the supporters of official numismatics will not have a single argument left. Not one. None whatsoever. So, the year 2010. An international group of scholars, and results that changed everything. Modern science can do things that seemed like fantasy just half a century ago. One of them is isotope analysis of metals. The principle is simple and irrefutable. Every deposit of silver, gold, or copper on the planet has a unique isotopic composition. This means that the ratio of lead, silver, and copper isotopes in ore from Spanish mines differs from the composition of ore from Greek mines, from Asia Minor, from Africa, or from America. It differs just as clearly and unambiguously as a fingerprint distinguishes one person from another. This is not interpretation, this is physics, this is chemistry. This is the atomic structure of matter, which does not change because someone labeled a coin ancient and placed it behind museum glass. It was precisely this instrument that an international group of scientists applied in the year 2010. 4 countries, 4 academic institutions, 4 names worth remembering: Anne-Marie de Salty, France; Philippe Teluc, France; Emmanuel Albalat, Spain; Francis Albared, United States. All 4 specialists in geochemistry and isotope analysis, with years of publications in leading scientific journals. People whose professional reputation permitted neither carelessness nor the adjustment of results to fit a desired conclusion. This applies to the very nature of isotope analysis as a method. Its results are reproducible, independent of the observer, and admit no subjective interpretation. This is not an expert opinion, it is a measurement. The group selected several dozen samples for examination. Not random coins from a flea market, the finest, most celebrated, most authoritative silver ancient coins from private collections and the world's greatest museums. The very ones used for decades as benchmark specimens, the ones cited in textbooks, the ones featured in the catalogues of the British Museum, the Paris Cabinet of Medals, the Madrid National Archaeological Museum. Samples whose authenticity had until that moment been doubted by absolutely no specialist. The instruments began their work. Isotopes were measured. Ratios were recorded. And here began something that none of the researchers had anticipated. Or rather, something they should not have found if the coins had been what everyone believed them to be. Silver. All the silver. Every single coin in the studied sample. Each specimen, without exception, made from silver extracted not in Greece, not in Asia Minor, not in Spain of ancient times, not in Africa, not in any of the regions that official history names as the sources of silver for the coinage of the great civilisations of antiquity. All the silver had been mined in America. In America, which Europeans discovered in 1492. In America, which simply did not exist on any map available to the makers of Greek coins in the 4th century before the Common Era. In America, whose silver began reaching Europe no earlier than the first half of the 16th century. The scientists did not stop at a general conclusion. They identified specific deposits. The isotopic signature of the silver pointed precisely and unambiguously. The mines of Lima in Peru and the mines of Potosi in Bolivia. It was from there that Spanish conquistadors extracted silver on an industrial scale from the 16th to the 18th centuries. It was from there that the metal came from which the coins now held in the world's museums under labels reading Ancient Greece, Rome, Persia, and the Bosporan Kingdom were struck. This applies to the entire examined sample without a single exception. Not one of the tested coins contained silver from deposits that could theoretically have been accessible to craftsmen of antiquity. Forgeries, not isolated specimens, not dubious lots from second-tier auctions. The finest coins of the finest museums in the world. Forgeries of the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. Made from American silver that physically could not have existed in ancient Greece or Rome. Moreover, the scientists established that this same conclusion extended to a substantial portion of European coins of the 12th, 13th, and 14th centuries, also considered genuine and also held in museum collections as credible historical artifacts. These too turned out to be forgeries. Also the 16th to 18th centuries. Also American silver. The results were published on the 31st of May, 2011, in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States of America, one of the most authoritative, peer-reviewed scientific journals in the world. The full title of the article: Isotopic Aged CU-PB Records of Silver Circulation in 16th to 18th Century Spain. The article passed through the full procedure of scientific peer review. It is available in open access. It can be found, read and verified. It exists, and it says precisely what I have just stated. A scandal erupted. Quiet, quickly suppressed, carefully removed from front pages, but a scandal nonetheless. Because it is impossible to refute the results of isotope analysis. One can stay silent, one can ignore them, one can behave as though the article does not exist, but refute them? No. The reaction of the museum community to the publication was itself revealing. No refutation, no counter-study, no open scientific discussion, which in normal science follows any significant result. None of this happened. Instead, silence. Organized, coordinated, eloquent silence from people who had understood perfectly what had occurred and made the only decision that would preserve the status quo. Museums refused to provide samples for further analysis. All of them, without exception. The British Museum refused. The Louvre refused. The National Museums of Spain, Germany, and Austria refused. Private collectors who the day before had proudly displayed their holdings at exhibitions closed their doors. Antique dealers specializing in numismatics ceased all cooperation with research groups working in isotope analysis. A market that a moment earlier had been open and welcoming lowered its barrier. This applies to the only possible explanation for such behavior. In genuine science, an authentic artifact has nothing to fear from analysis. A genuine coin only benefits from any examination. Refusing examination is not caution, it is admission. Think about this calmly and without emotion. If the coins were genuine, what would the museums have lost by providing another 100 samples for isotope analysis? Nothing. On the contrary, they would have received scientific confirmation of the authenticity of their collections that would have settled any doubts once and for all. Reputations would have been reinforced. The value of collections would have risen. Public trust would have reached an absolute peak. Any rational institution confident in its holdings would have seized such an opportunity with both hands. The museums refused, all of them simultaneously. Without explanations, without discussion, without alternative proposals. This is not a coincidence, this is a consensus. A consensus of people who knew that repeated analysis would produce the same result. Or, worse for them, a result still more devastating. More than 10 years have passed since the publication. In that time, isotope analysis technology has become more precise, more accessible, and less expensive. The number of independent research groups capable of conducting such an examination has grown. Scientific interest in the subject has not disappeared. But no large-scale repeated study on a representative sample of museum coins has been conducted. Because museums will not provide samples, and without samples there is no analysis. This applies to a mechanism that in politics is called obstruction of an investigation. When an institution with access to evidence denies that access to investigators, a court generally draws certain conclusions about the reasons for such a refusal. Meanwhile, the results of the 2010 study continue to exist. They are published, they are verified, they are not refuted, because refuting them is impossible without data, and the data the museums will not provide. The circle is closed, a perfect, hermetic circle inside which the entire official history of antiquity is locked. What follows from all of this? What follows is a conclusion that I will state without equivocation, without academic qualification, and without diplomatic softening. Genuine ancient coins do not exist. They never existed. What is held in museums under the name of ancient consists either of undated coins of the 16th and 17th centuries from Asia and the Black Sea region, reattributed to suit the market, or of professional forgeries produced by specific people at a specific time for specific purposes. Or, and this is what science confirms, of objects made from American silver that physically could not have existed in the time and place attributed to them. This means that the entire numismatics of antiquity, the discipline on which a substantial portion of the evidentiary foundation of official history of Greece, Rome, Persia, and Byzantium rests, is built on a foundation of forged metal. That textbooks, museum catalogues, auction results, and scholarly monographs that rely on these coins as a source contain not history but its imitation. Many continue to believe. This is understandable. Rebuilding a picture of the world into which decades of schooling, university courses, and cultural assumptions have been invested is painful. It is far easier to declare the skeptic a crank and continue living within the comfortable version of the past. This is precisely what the system counts on, that the majority of people will choose comfortable ignorance over inconvenient truth. But facts do not disappear because they are ignored. Isotopes do not change their composition because a museum refused to provide a sample. American silver in an ancient coin does not become Greek silver because the profile of Alexander the Great is stamped on it. The history you were taught at school does not become true because it was repeated long enough and confidently enough. Antiquity did not exist, and now you know why. You watched until the end. That matters. Because most people stop halfway, at the point where history has not yet become uncomfortable. You did not stop. That means you are one of those who need the truth rather than a convenient version of the past. If this video made you think, hit the like button. Not for the algorithm, but because likes are precisely what allows material like this to break through thousands of hours of entertainment content and reach the people who genuinely need it. The ones who ask the right questions. The ones who are not prepared to take things on faith. Subscribe to the channel. There will be no easy topics and no simple answers here. There will be facts, documents, names, and dates. There will be stories that official history would prefer to bury permanently. Hit the bell so you do not miss a single episode, because the next one will be no less devastating. The history you knew is not the only version of events, and you have just taken the first step toward another.